Welcome to Project Maturing Devlog number 2. For the last week I worked on probably the most important thing in the whole game, and that is spell casting. It was very important for me to build similar feeling to sorcery, game that is the biggest inspiration for this project. First of all, I had to finish one last movement mechanic, which was quite an easy task. As you can see, now you can hover in air while holding jump button. I wanted to keep it nice and clean, so all that I did was that I checked in movement update function whether or not player's upward velocity is less than 5, meaning that player is falling down. Once this is happening and player holds jump button, movement state will switch to air hover state, meaning his gravity is only 0.2 instead of normal 4.4. Then it was time for spells. First of all, I made this ground spell, which will hold roll of shield for the player. I made it so that it allows me to have every spell associated with different mouse movement, and the way I did this is that when spell cast button is pressed, it saves initial camera yaw and pitch rotation, then, after about 0.2 seconds, if mouse button is still being pressed, it checks for new camera yaw and pitch rotation, it compares them, and decides which direction has priority. This should create at least a remote feeling of moving a wand and really casting spells with it. That's at least closest that I can get with mouse and keyboard. It's really unique way of play, I think, and I hope that once you try it out, you will think the same. So next up was just typical spell. I wanted it to have similar properties when it comes to casting, so I used the same function for checking spell direction as with ground spell and made new, robust function for deciding what spell type should be casted based on mouse movement and selected spell element, such as fire, earth, wind, water and such. And before you ask, yeah, it's inspired by Avatar, kind of. I love that show, and it made sense to make elements this way. Players will be way more familiar with them that way, I think. Next up was wave spell, meaning that you can burst, for example, bunch of rocks from ground like a wave and give big knockback, and some additional effects to each of the wave types element wise. So the way I did this was that I made two actors actually. One functions as wave spell initiator and allows wave to go trough loop, so it has limited number of wave members. The second one was the actual wave member. Thanks to this system that I have in place, I can safely tell initiator where to spawn. This initiator then traces to the ground and saves hit location and floor normal so that the newest wave member can spawn on correct position with correct rotation depending on the floor normal. Initiator loops said number of times which I can change. On each loop it checks for location and normal, then spawns wave member and adds to the next trace check and offset so that the next member does not spawn on the same position but actually in front of last wave member. Next in line were some changes that would make this system more precise because it's not really that easy at this point to use spells, so I created targeting system on enemy entities. As a base I used again another tutorial by Rewis Fiford. I just had to tweak a few things for it to function properly, then a weird bug appeared. Sometimes, spells were traveling really slowly when they targeted enemy. The issue was the way that spell moves. It moves based on timeline because it has to have offset when it's curved. It changes timeline length based on distance of player to target location, but this calculation, when enemy is targeted, still takes into consideration original target location, which is 10,000 units away from player, so there was really simple fix. I just set target location to targeted enemy location before distance calculation, and that was it. Next up, I added knock effect to enemy once he is hit by spell. It was a little harder task than I expected because, for the nature of these spells, I couldn't use event hit, and therefore there were some custom calculations involved. It's still a little buggy, but the fixes won't be anything interesting, so I won't mention them once I get to fixing them. Next up was Splash Spell. This is specially useful with elements water and fire, which will use this spell for icy and burnt surface. So first things first, I created actor with decal and bounding box which will be used for detecting overlapped objects. Then next, on the spell spawn, I trace a set number of traces to the ground and save their hit location and ground normal. With this I can spawn particles such as fire on the ground with randomized location and precise rotation. Then I made it so that after specific time, specifically set lifetime of splash spell, it will disappear, but there was bug, because of which particles would stay in their place forever. This was easy fix. I just created array of particle class and added all the particles that spawn on this splash to this array. I then just looped through this array destroying every particle. There were some problems with the alignment of the splash. It took just a little while to fix, and it wasn't really interesting, so here are nodes for that. Then I made spells distinct for each element by changing their material. In the end it worked really well. For each spell of each element I can now set damage it's dealing, and also time for which this damage will be dealt, because I wanted each spell and each element to have its own distinct effect on objects and enemies. Last but not least, I applied this effects to enemy actor. I made it so that the damage is dealt for specific amount of time, and the timer for this effect won't start depleting until enemy is away from spell's range. This is useful mainly for splash spell which will be dealing damage without stopping until enemy is away from it. I can exactly tell how long a specific spell effect should take place. That would be all for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. This is still very early prototype, so some of the systems are still really buggy, and I have a lot of tweaking and fixing in front of myself. I also have to balance all of the spells so that they each have their own distinct place in the combat, but more on all that next time. In the meantime you can follow me on Instagram, where I post some of my not really that good art. You can also subscribe to this channel and leave a comment what do you think about the game so far. So, see you next time.